Retro.
Hi, this is Fred Tatasciore, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. The Force is strong with both of them.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we have a guest. You know him as the famous and inestimable host of Star Wars 7x7 and now an author, Alan Voivod. Thanks for joining us, Alan. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. How are you two doing?
Doing fantastic.
Yeah, so good to have you back on, Alan. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I really love doing these movie episodes with you guys. I'm so grateful that you asked me back.
Well,
always.
You always bring your A game, so it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. You bring a ton to the series, and we couldn't do it without you. So as we were just suggesting there, we're getting ready to do the next installment in our The Force Awakens series. But before we get into that, Jay, I want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are.
Absolutely. We're really easy to find. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The dish is aligned. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So this is part 4 of our series on The Force Awakens. And so, Alan, we're going to get this started with the questions that we pose to all of our guests for these. And so you get to be the next in line for this little bit of torture. Jay, you want to kick it off?
Sure thing. So, this is the first movie in the reboot of Disney, of course. So where were you when you heard that Disney was making new Star Wars movies? So where were you? Do you remember physically where you were at the time when you heard the news, or where were you in your fandom, in your life? Talk to us about that.
I actually know exactly where I was. I was in a car on a road called Watson Road, which is just in our little town of Guilford here where I live. And I heard the news that this was happening on the radio, of all things. I don't know, for all the times that I listened to just, FM radio, I mean, but this is back in 2012, which was a simpler time, of course. And so I guess that's when I was listening to it, and I heard about the sale of Lucasfilm and that they were going to be doing new Star Wars movies. And somehow I did not steer the car into a ditch in shock. But and of course, the moment I got home, it was, straight to the internet to find out just what the heck was going on with this. And at the time, I was really, I'll say that's one of the, the dark times kind of situations where I wasn't really reading any of the expanded universe stuff, and I hadn't been for a number of years. So no books, no comics, no anything like that. I was still just happy that Star Wars existed. I had fond memories of, showing it to my kids and being particular about the fact that I had the DVDs that still had the original cut of the movie without the special editions stuff on it, and wanting them to see those versions. But I remember being absolutely blown away and thinking that up until that time, well, it had been a good run. We had the 6, and that was fine. And I, remembered Lucas saying, I'm not going to do any more of these. Why would you ever want to do any more of them when people just tell you what a terrible person you are all the time? And I'm like, you know what? I get it, George. If I were you, I wouldn't want any part of it either. But he found a way to, make it happen by, turning it over. So yeah, that was my sort of story on the origin of finding out that this was going to happen.
No, I love that. And one of the reasons why I'm so excited to have you on, Alan, for this series is that back in 2014 is when I really first started getting into podcasts. And then it spilled over to when you launched Star Wars 7x7. And so you were one of the voices that I was listening to on a regular basis that led us into the release of this movie. And, a lot of the podcasts that existed back then are either not around today, have different hosts, or just have kind of like come and gone. And, it's a very different Star Wars podcast landscape. There's still plenty of Star Wars podcasts out there, but you're one of those voices. You covered the developed this movie, quite a bit, and you were reporting on the different things that came out about it. Do you have a favorite theory that was being kicked around back then, or a bit of hype that would led up to the release of The Force Awakens that you can remember?
It isn't necessarily one thing per se. It's the fact that there were all of these leaks and rumors and spoilers going around, and I know that existed in the time when the prequels were being made, but I was, never really paying that close attention to it. Just life in general, whatever. I guess I had more time and more reason to pay attention to that sort of thing when The Force Awakens was in development. And I just remember thinking to myself, how far do I really want to pursue this, even for my own situations? I remember doing episodes where I would talk about the things that were happening on the inside, things that were being reported and whatnot, and then saying on the podcast, all right, there's some spoilery things going on, and we're going to save those things to the end of the podcast. And then, I'd give people the chance to jump and say, all right, if you don't want to hear anything, then be done. And at some point, I did kind of decide for myself, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to have it totally ruined for me. I know there are people actually, I think this is more prevalent these days now, where people are interested in the spoilers, but not even just for the fact of wanting to spoil the movie for themselves, but also that it actually kind of helps them with their own experience of the movie. They kind of actually like to know as much as possible about the movie before they even go into the movie, because in some cases, this actually gives a bit of a comfort for people who might even have a little bit of anxiety about about seeing new things or anything like that, and having some very detailed knowledge about what it is they're going in to see is actually kind of comforting for some people as well from a psychological perspective. So that seems to be one of those new kind of learnings. Maybe that existed back in 2015 and I just wasn't aware of it at the time, but the more that I learn about people who have had these experiences and who have been digging into leaks and rumors and spoilers and the reasons why they do it, are just, it's so different and so varied from what I ever assumed it was. I always thought it was just, for the clicks and the reputation and whatnot, but there's a lot more going on to that landscape. And so that, I think, was kind of a fascinating thing for me to discover. But ultimately, finding where my limit was. I had somebody tell me in advance about the connection between Kylo Ren and Han Solo. And that was like the moment where I was like, okay, and it hadn't been confirmed anywhere, but the fact that like somebody said, I know somebody on the inside who knows this connection. And I don't know why I'm being coy about it now as we talk about it 11 years later. But I was like, okay, that's the point at which I was like, I don't want to know. I don't want to know anymore. I think I drew the line there.
Well, it's really interesting how you said that some people like to prepare themselves ahead of time, which
Yeah.
I can see that, because if you're doing something that's really stressful for yourself, you kind of want to have all the details ahead of time on that.
Mhm.
And I guess I never really thought about it that way before. And that's an interesting way to approach it. But there's those people, but then there's others that don't want to be spoiled, that those people spoil it for. And so I think, the choice to be spoiled is a very personal one for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
No,
Interesting.
and I totally get that, because I found that with some movies, I enjoy them the second time more than I did the first time, because I know what to expect. That anxiety you spoke to earlier, Alan, I think is a key thing. It's especially when sequels, when you have characters you've been following for a number of movies, and there's this possibility they may not survive till the end of the movie. It's you're on the edge of your seat the entire time. And
Mhm.
that being said, it's, I'm in a similar place. There was a couple things that were spoiled for me for The Force Awakens. And then after that, I was very guarded with my social media experience in relation to that movie, and quit following certain accounts and listening to certain podcasts in order to preserve as much as I could going into that movie. But yeah. All right. Jay, take it away. The next question.
Well, why don't you tell us about your first viewing, Alan, and what that was like?
So I actually, the first viewing was, do you remember the marathon? Yeah. So we got tickets for myself and my wife and the two boys, and we got tickets to the marathon in Boston. And so, yeah, starting with the midnight showing of The Phantom Menace and going all through the movies. And I am pretty sure we dozed through various parts of the original trilogy. It was, there weren't a lot of dining options around there, aside from like the movie theater did not necessarily do that great in terms of like having like decent breakfast, decent lunch kind of things. They just had their movie theater stuff, which is fine, whatever. So we spent a good amount of time in Dunkin' Donuts that was right down the block in between trilogies. So we were all pretty wiped by the time it hit the 7 p.m. showtime for The Force Awakens on that opening night. It was a wild ride. And I think, speaking to the anxiety of also just the first viewing and being able to enjoy it better on a second viewing, like it was like that for me. I felt like I had been so deeply invested in the production and post-production, all the reporting that I'd been doing on the podcast, that it was really hard to watch it the first time without being super analytical and critical and questioning about every last thing about the movie, and not just being able to relax and enjoy the presentation. So I wouldn't trade the experience for the world. It was like really an awesome, amazing thing to do, but it was also a tough watch under those circumstances for me. I don't know. What about you guys?
Oh, I saw it that morning, and then I took with my wife, and I took the boys to see it that afternoon. Then I saw it one more time that weekend, and I admire you, and I do remember you posting on social media about your experience going to see the marathon beforehand, and marching into the theater, I think with your pillows and everything like that, just to make yourselves comfortable. And again, I'm as a big fan of Star Wars by 7x7, I have a lot of fond memories of the coverage you've done of these things. And I just remember admiring that there is like, I've been to like one like double or triple showing, and I can't remember what it was for in the past. And that was so hard to get through. So going through 6 movies in order to make it to a brand new one, it seemed like such an endurance test to me at the time.
It was, to the point where it was already baked enough in my skin that I was like, when they did it for The Rise of Skywalker, I was like, nope.
Don't blame you.
Oh, that's great. And of course, Dennis and I kind of already knew your answer because we've both read your book, but you added a lot more detail to, what that was like as well. Yeah, for me, it wasn't quite a midnight showing. It was when they first started doing midnight showings at like 10 o'clock PM, kind of thing. But it was at a local theater, and of course I wore my pseudo X-Wing costume kind of thing, and in anticipation, and it was a lot of fun. Yeah. And I just remember walking out and thinking to myself, no one had better spoil anything for these people that are in line waiting, because we knew the big thing that happened, and so
the funniest thing about that, it was that since it was December when the movie came out, my parents came down for the holidays, and they hadn't seen the movie yet, so I took them, and it was still early in the release, like only been out for a week or two at that point. And so we went and I took them to see the movie with my family. And then after we got out, we were in the lobby, and my mom put a finger in my face. She says, "You didn't tell me that Han." So I was like, "Mom, keep it down." We're in a theater of people who may not have seen this movie. And I'm just like, shh, be quiet. You don't want to spoil it for them. But she was so upset with me that I didn't warn her in advance. So getting back to what you said earlier about the spoilers and the anxiety aspect of it, she really had a reaction to that.
Oh my gosh. All right, so I'll tell you a story that I don't think I've ever told anyone. And maybe somebody experienced it or not, I don't know. But I tried to do a live stream outside the theater right after we saw The Force Awakens, and I said to the kids, I said, whatever you do, no spoilers, tell them how you reacted. And so I went live, I think it was on Facebook. I went live and I said, hey, it's Alan from Star Wars 7x7. We just got out of The Force Awakens. I'm here with my boys. What did you think of it? And my older son, the first words out of his mouth were, I can't believe they killed Han Solo. The literal first words out of his mouth. And I immediately ended the live stream and I was like, I hope to high heaven that there is a delay on this. And I was like, honey, that was hard.
Oh no.
I remember that, Alan, because you came right back with an immediate thing talking about the trying to, what are the words I'm looking for, about that you'd hope that it hadn't impacted anyone's experience, and that how bad he felt about everything in the time. So I mean, I had seen the movie at that point, so it didn't affect my viewing, but
did you hear him say that?
I did not hear the live stream, but I do remember of that. But I do remember you coming on and being apologetic about it afterwards. So now that you bring that up, I do remember the aftermath of it.
Oh.
So,
I felt so bad on so many levels about that, like spoiling, but also just my poor son. Like, and when I turned it off and he was like, "Oh God, I'm so sorry." Like, and
you came back on. He was apologizing in the background. I do remember hearing his voice saying, "I'm so sorry," or something along those lines. Man, this brings back. So I'm so glad we're happy for this. This is bringing back so many memories from that. As I've told Jay, the lead up to The Force Awakens is one of my favorite eras of being a Star Wars fan ever, because I met so many people through podcasts and social media from around the world during that time period, and how we were all excited about the same thing.
Oh yeah.
In a way that, when I was younger, sometimes being a Star Wars fan could make me feel alienated. And the difference was that it was much more broadly appreciated and anticipated at that time. And so it's the thing. It's like, it's why I'm more excited for Star Wars Starfighter than I am for the Mandalorian and Grogu, because there's so much more unknown about Starfighter than there is the Mando and Grogu. And I think there's this opportunity for everyone to kind of discover together again when it comes up to that movie. So
yeah. It's really interesting you say that about, I mean, did you use the word shame? Is that what, like, that wasn't quite it, or was it?
No, it was when I just remember being younger, at some point you were just kind of expected to outgrow being a Star Wars fan and stuff like that. And so, like, in high school and in the 90s when I was in college and stuff like that, I had a Star Wars poster in there, and certain people appreciate it, but you kind of had to put a cap on your fandom at some point. It was what you displayed for the social retribution that you would experience otherwise.
Yeah, all right, and then maybe the shame is like in here, because like the difference in thinking about that being such a great time to be a Star Wars fan. Like, when The Phantom Menace came out in '99, I remember being in Tampa, Florida for work, and I was there for like a 3-week engagement. I was living in California at the time, so I was like, a long ways away, and I'd been, thrilled about The Phantom Menace and super happy about it. But I had been a toy collector, in my days, and still had a ton of the vintage stuff. And I had a moment where I felt like it was a literal breakdown, and I went into a Toys R Us and bought a whole bunch of Phantom Menace toys and stuffed them in my suitcase. And I felt like, some latent shame about it. Like, I shouldn't be doing this. I'm a grown man buying, like 29 years old, buying Star Wars toys. Like, what am I doing? Like, but I couldn't help it. And that feeling of like it being an awkward thing to do and weird contrasts completely with the experience of, do you remember Force Friday that they did in September of 2015? So where midnight at Toys R Us, they opened the doors and they said, we're dropping a ton of Force Awakens merchandise. And I was like, this is amazing. And the joy of being able to like be waiting at a Toys R Us for a midnight opening and going in and seeing all the figures and all the ships and all the stuff that they were offering, and like that joy compared to what it had been like in '99 and how I had felt around it then, like I completely I completely hear you about it being such a great time to have been a fan at that moment leading up to The Force Awakens. I felt that very same way.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was very, very special. I remember I didn't make it to a midnight release, but I went to the local Target the day of that Force Friday and
Mhm,
just seeing 3 generations of fans there in that aisle, looking at all the Star Wars stuff, the new, and it reminded me of, keenly of Return of the Jedi, when I
mm,
also went to a Target and saw that Star Wars aisle, a couple months outside of the movie, and wondering what all these characters were, the Gamorrean Guard, the Imperial Guard, the Scout
mhm,
Trooper, and the like, and then having that same type of feeling with, I don't know who any of these characters are, and I love it. All I can do is dream and speculate about what their role might be in this movie. And
mhm,
Jay's heard me talk about this. I am so excited for this phase leading up to Starfighter. Just when we start getting images of new characters that, you know, don't get me wrong, I am super excited for the Mandalorian and Grogu, but I know who the Mandalorian is. I know who Grogu is. I know who the various Hutts are that have shown up in the trailer. We know comparatively little about the characters in Starfighter, and so it just adds that level of intrigue and anticipation that I think we've been
yeah,
missing for 12 years at this point. So
yeah.
I'm super excited for that. Okay. These next 2 questions, we're going to go a little bit faster because we still have to dive into the segment. We've been talking for 20 minutes. And I loved it. This conversation has been fantastic.
Oh, there's
Who,
so many other ways we could go.
yeah, no kidding. And I'm so glad you could join us for this, Alan. Who was your
Thank you.
favorite character from The Force Awakens?
Hmm.
And it doesn't have to be a new character. It could be a classic character as well.
It's always R2D2. I mean, I was so happy when they revealed him in there, and the fact that he like finally woke up and powered up, and the first thing he does is say something profane to C3PO.
Of course.
Is so heartwarming. I was thinking about this a little bit too, with the fact that the dialogue, like I really love Rey and Poe and Finn as the new characters together. And I remember thinking about how Willard Hike and Gloria Katz punched up the dialogue for the original Star Wars, and so it's got all of that banter that you love from like 40s movies, Hepburn and Tracy kind of things. And like rewatching the segment that we're gonna watch, I kind of got that same feeling. Like J.J. Abrams and Larry Kasdan really dialed in that dialogue and the way that those 3 characters interact with each other, just the pop, 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 pop. I mean, it was like 3 all brand new characters, and I was like, I'm in for the ride with these 3. Like they are really well done. But yeah, my heart always goes to R2D2, and just, knowing that he was still the same droid that we all knew and loved from everything. I was so glad to see him back.
Oh,
I
yeah.
love it.
You can never go wrong with R2, you know?
No. What
He's so
about you?
great. Oh,
Uh, well, we did. March was a crazy month for both of us with Jay's personal life and then a vacation that I had, and we ended
Mhm,
up doing the Escape from Jakku episode just by ourselves. And in there we talked a bit about that ends up being our favorite scene, which is going to be our next question for us as a promo. But for me, favorite characters, it's hard to say. I've always been drawn to Poe Dameron, I think,
mhm,
and this just because he seems to be a little bit of Han, a little bit of Luke, a little bit of Leia, and in his own way there. And I just, his character takes some developments in the next 2 movies, which are fine and well. But I just loved how gung ho he was. Like, we're going to do this, we're going to escape, and just calling Finn out on the "you need a pilot," that type of thing. And
mhm,
so yeah, Poe I think is always been my favorite from that movie. But it's so hard with that because
mhm.
that cast had such great chemistry that in any one given moment, one of them you can pick them as just shining in any particular scene.
mhm.
Mhm. It's so true. For me, it was BB-8 right away. I fell in love
Mm.
with BB-8 right away, and it took me a little while to warm up to both Rey and Kylo Ren as
Yeah.
characters, and I think for some of that, it was just I think they broke the mold so much that I wasn't expecting it. And so it was harder, I think, for me to wrap my head around what their characters were like in this new era, you know. So yeah, so I saw it 11 times in the theater, so it took me a while to
Oh, wow.
I know it's we were talking about that on another one of the episodes as well, that I still have. That's when they actually gave you tickets, you know. So I have
Yeah.
like all the I need to frame them. I keep saying that I'm going to, and I have them in a little Ziploc bag in a drawer, but I need to put them in a frame and actually put them up.
That would be cool to do. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I kind of teased it, so I'm just going to go ahead and spit it out here. But what was your favorite scene from The Force Awakens?
It's hard to pick one, but I think it's more of a moment than anything else, and it's in this, you know, this run that we're going to talk about tonight. But the moment Han and Chewie show up on the Falcon and he says, "Chewie, we're home." Like I'm sorry if I cannot remember this, but were you guys at Celebration in 2015?
I was not.
Yeah. Okay.
I was there.
Yeah. Okay. So like you remember being in the room, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. When everything just like, just for, you know, for everybody listening, if you weren't there, like they were showing the you know, like all new footage for the first time in the main, you know, hall, and the opening act of the whole Celebration event. And the screen goes dark, like it's totally just blackout dark in the room. And you hear Harrison Ford say, "Chewie." And the room just exploded. And then they come on the screen and you hear them. I'm about to get emotional talking about it. Like they say, "We're home." And then they do the, "Ta-da!" you know, of the fanfare. And it was like, it was just overwhelming. Oh gosh, it was
That's so
overwhelming. Like,
true. Yeah.
yeah.
I get chills even thinking about it now. And you're right. I mean, you couldn't even hear yourself think at that point because it was just insane.
Screaming. In fact, I
Yeah.
don't even know for sure if I heard him say, "We're home," the first time, because everybody was like, again, and they played it again. And there was still, like, I think if I remember right, like Jay, it was limited screaming after the Chewie
Right.
moment,
Yes.
until like, so everybody could hear exactly what happened, and then it was screaming all over again.
So true.
Yeah.
Oh
So
my gosh.
the perspective of someone who was not at Celebration, I was in my office, and when that first day of Celebration was happening, I cleared my calendar, locked the door to my office, and put that live stream on that morning. And so, you know, I was an hour or 2 hours ahead of you all because of the time difference without being in Anaheim. And they showed the trailer there, and they had the audio from the people that were in attendance. And I highlighted this moment in my notes, Alan, because I am so glad you brought it up, because when you heard the gravelly voice of Harrison Ford, "Chewie, we're home," and when he comes on, it was all I could do not to scream in my office. I just sat there and chuckled for a few minutes, and then they played it again on there, and I was like, "I'm done for the day." I was like, I hope no one else needs anything from me, because I'm going to go online. This is going to be on repeat on all day. And it was just, I'm with you. And when I was making the notes for the segment for our discussion, at that, when that point was coming up, because I try and watch all the movies at least once per year, but I could not remember the last time I put The Force Awakens on and paid this much attention to it, because the Star Wars movies are such comfort food for me that I don't have to typically sit down and watch every second of them. But just sitting down and knowing it was happening, I was gripping the arms of my chair and bouncing up and down when he did that. And you're right, it is just such it. And I don't know if that would hit the same way for the younger generations as it would hit for us, because for the longest time, Han, Luke, and Leia are all we had for Star Wars. We didn't have the prequel generation. We didn't have the sequel generation. And hearing him come, I mean, that was just a genius move to put that in the trailer. Chewie, we're home. I mean, it was, for us Gen Xers, that was such a welcome back. We're here. And so,
oh yeah. Well, I feel like that's kind of the same reaction that our kids grew up on the Clone Wars, and so now they're starting to see some of their favorite characters from the animated series even coming to life in live action. And I feel
Mhm.
like for them it's a similar sort of reaction, because I know I have a 23-year-old as well, Alan. We were talking about that a little
Mhm.
offline, and he is so into Star Wars. I mean, I don't know if you knew that I call him Colby Wan, but that's his nickname. And so, and he'll post things all the time, but he's just like, oh, yes, yes, yes. And he'll message me, Mom, did you see who's coming back? So I think
Mhm.
it's a similar reaction, but Dennis, to your point, it's different in the way that we didn't have anything else. And that was our big three. Those were our heroes. And it was just, yeah, oh gosh, it was so amazing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so then Dennis, your excitement about Starfighter, and Jay, I don't know if you're in the same boat with it, but like the possibility of either Ray or Poe or Finn showing up and, them keeping this as the world's biggest secret. I
Uh-huh.
mean, I imagine I don't have any insider knowledge on that at all and haven't heard any leaks or rumors or spoilers about it. So I'm just saying, like, if they pull that on us, then I think I think like this current generation might have that kind of excited reaction. I almost wish that there had been a similar kind of thing for the Ahsoka series, where if they had had some kind of trailer and an experience somewhere where you see it in a group setting like that, and if they had done the same kind of thing, but just a quick reveal of Anakin in the world between worlds. And
Mm-hmm.
I
Oh,
think
yeah.
people lost their minds over that. Like that, all
Right.
the people who grew up on the prequels, I think they would have just had that exact same kind of experience. Like,
Yeah.
Well, it was like when Palpatine showed up in the Rise of Skywalker trailer that they showed at Star Wars Celebration Chicago back in
yes,
2019, and just like
yes.
Mhm.
the stunt. I was standing next to Jay.
Yes.
That was the first weekend we'd ever been in the same place at the same time,
Woo.
and that came on. Just everyone was looking at each other with stunned expressions when we heard that cackle from Palpatine.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I could spend another hour just
So
reminiscing
fun.
with you about the
I keep
experience,
doing
but
this. I do this every time, guys. I'm
yeah.
so sorry.
No, no, no. This was
No apologies.
100% worth it, and
Kidding.
one of the reasons why we keep having you back, Alan. So, thank you so much for helping us with this. I'm going to
Amazing.
treasure these first 30 minutes forever. But let's get into the segment, which runs from 36 minutes and 38 seconds to 49 minutes and 20 seconds, and starts off with a shot of Kylo Ren's Star Destroyer, and then we see Kylo looking at a console of various things in his ship, and an officer wanders up, and he has the unfortunate responsibility to report that the BB unit that they were looking for in Jakku has escaped on a freighter. To which Kylo responds, "The droid stole a freighter," and he said, "Well, he had help. We believe it was FN 2187." Kylo throws his tantrum and then turns to the officer and calmly says, "Anything else?" And then he says, "The two are accompanied by a girl," and he pulls him over the Force and holds him up by the neck, a la Darth Vader, and says, "What girl?" So, um, uh, you know, it's a brief scene that tells us, I think, a little bit about Kylo's tantrum, that
Mhm.
he comes by naturally from Anakin. But what else about this stands out to you, Alan?
Well, two things. First, with the tantrum, like we've seen that he's seemingly more powerful than we've seen a lot of Force users previously. Like the idea that he could freeze a laser bolt in the air is kind of shocking, and then the mind penetration that he does with Poe. So we already know that he's like ridiculously powerful, but then to see him throw this tantrum also, that to me made him feel more dangerous than I had been expecting him to be. I was like, okay, it's one thing for him to be powerful, and sometimes, at least a, smart and rational, under control, powerful is a very scary thing. And he has his little, snippy dialogue with General Hux earlier on, but like this moment where he just absolutely loses his mind and destroys stuff. Yeah, it felt like, oh no, we are dealing with a younger, angrier, and more powerful generation, like that you just don't know what's going to happen. It added an element of a different kind of danger to Star Wars than I was necessarily prepared for. So that moment was kind of shocking to me. And then, and then immediately taking the edge off it with the anything else, like, it's almost like the filmmakers knew, like, oh, we're pushing a line here. And then we kind of have to, like, just remember you are in Star Wars a little bit, we got to at least give it back just a little bit. So I thought the calibration of that was really interesting. And then the whole what girl thing, I've been back and forth over this movie, and I'm like, were they trying to seed something like some sort of awareness or something like that? And I feel like that was just a big old, like, either I read something into it that wasn't there, or it was just a giant red herring where they were like, oh, we had an idea, but we're not necessarily going to do anything about that. Maybe just the what girl is just his general anger and curiosity, and not some sort of secret, like, oh, this is the first tell that he knows something about a girl somewhere in the Western reaches, and this is a big deal, blah, blah, blah. Like, nah, it's just him going, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I'm 100% with you. And that was actually the question I was just about to ask Jay, if she thought anything of that line about what girl. I mean, because I remember that sticking with me, because, getting back into the nostalgia that comes with this movie when it first came out was, who is Rey?
Yeah.
And we all expected to come out of this movie with an answer, which they did not give us, other than she was abandoned by her family on this planet. And so on one hand, that was like brilliant to get us all talking up to The Last Jedi. And on the other hand, it's like it had us all looking for these clues. And I'm with you. That was one of those things that, his anticipating something about a girl on Jakku, it's like, oh, that's kind of suggestive. But what was your reaction to that, Jay?
Well, I mean, obviously in the audience, we're privy to the idea that there is a girl named Rey out there. But, in this scene, it's like you said, Alan, I think it was purposely almost planting that seed of, oh, does he know that there could be someone out there kind of thing. And I don't think that was the case. He's just, what girl? Like, who are you talking about? Like, what is this in this equation now that I can't control, like everything else that's falling apart around me right now? Because you're right. I mean, his whole tantrum was unhinged. And I almost had like secondhand embarrassment for him in a little bit of a way, because I was thinking, oh my gosh, like, what is he doing right now? But then, I thought about it and I thought, well, he can do that with a quote unquote underling, because he's not going to lose it in front of Hux. He's not going to lose it in front of, some of these other commanders and admirals and things like that. But he can take out his frustrations in the presence of someone like him. And, obviously but it also sends a message too, because he'll go back and he'll be like, oh my gosh, I just lived through Kylo Ren, almost killing me. And of course, I go back to Robot Chicken a lot in the, oh, he got force choked. Well, we'll just throw a mustache on him. Captain Leopold over here. He's been force choked 17 times.
Oh, gosh. Those are really fun.
Yeah. So from Kylo's tantrum, we get back to the Falcon, and Rey is attempting to fix the leak or whatever it was that we saw at the last time we saw them aboard there. And in the meantime, she's down in the bowels of the ship trying to make repairs, and she's asking for various tools in order to get that done. And Finn and BB-8 are left on the deck, and Finn admits to BB-8 that, yeah, okay, so I'm not really with the Resistance, but I need you to tell her where it is that you need to go. I'll make sure you get home, and then I'll be on my way. We got a deal. This is like a masterclass of puppetry here, because we can't understand anything that BB-8 is going to say, and he barely beeps him at all in this scene here. But just he rolls back in some alarm when Finn admits that he's not actually with the Resistance, and then when he's being pressured between Rey and Finn really wants him to tell where that base is, and that look back and forth, and when he finally says that the base is on the Alenia system, and Finn gives him the thumb up, and then he puts a little lighter out to do the same thing. You get the personality of BB-8 there. It just so spectacularly. And then, a little bit more character development where Finn says that, why is it you want to go back to Jakku? Because that's the plan. She's going to drop. them off at their base, and then she's going back to Jakku, and Finn is just beside himself. He's like, go back to Jakku. Why do you go back to Jakku? You have family there, you got a boyfriend, a cute boyfriend, and none of your business. That's why. Love the chemistry between those two. I've set up the scene there, and I've told you my favorite bit about it, but what stands out to you, Alan?
I particularly like you flagging the BB-8 business and the puppetry that went into it. And thinking about R2-D2, he always seemed so very expressive. And when you see BB-8 compared to R2-D2 and see just how technology has advanced, just in stepping out of the movie itself and just realizing, holy cow, that thing actually like works and moves around, and we'd seen it on celebration stages and whatnot, just like that it's actual technology where the head can separate from the body and it can roll all these different ways and do all that. Like, just the level of expressiveness in it, and just orders of magnitude greater than R2-D2, but also still realizing, like the filmmakers realizing how important it is for even a droid to be able to be expressive and to have its own personality. And BB-8 just seemed like a little bit of a fun kind of loyal dog with a little personality up until that point. And now you actually see BB-8 having moments of, I have to make a strategic decision about what's going on here, because he's still been entrusted with a mission. And now he's having, it's not just survive. Now it's survive, but also evaluate these people who have complete control of me. And so I feel like when I watched the scene, there seemed to be a lot of like, like, and it felt like it went on like just a little bit too long. And in my head, I was like, why is he just say it, just do something, or pick the choice? And I realized, no, this is a droid who is actively going through the decision tree of trying to figure out a very complicated decision making situation here. And I was like, oh yeah, that's why it's taken him so long, because he just doesn't know what to do. He's been dropped into a completely outrageous scenario, just like Rey, just like Finn. He is as much of an out of fish out of water participant in this as they are.
Right. Yeah. And he's been tasked with such a huge responsibility, as you said, because he's kind of a war orphan at this point. He doesn't know that Poe is still alive, and he's just kind of like, okay, I got to do the best that I can do. And who am I trusting, and should I trust? And so, to your point earlier, also, Alan, with all of the dialogue and everything, just the boom, 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 boom. BB-8 is definitely part of that, for sure. And I also have to say, just backing up just a second, I love this scene when Rey is like, that one, no, the one I'm pointing to, no. Like, as a parent, I think we all have had that pain. You know what I mean? Like, no, it's the one I'm pointing to, that one right there.
That was one of my favorite drops that, like, so many different podcasts were using back then after this movie came out. That no, the 1.2, no. I love that one too as well, and I use that line on my kids as well. The other thing I'd point out about BB-8 on this scene is, it happened with Chewbacca, it happened with R2-D2, and now it's happening with BB-8. You have a character who doesn't speak English, and how well Lawrence Kasdan and the like write those scenes so that you're not being hit over the head with we got to talk to this droid. The audience has to understand what the droid is saying. So they subtly have the character that's interacting with the droid either repeat something the droid just said, but in English, or they give you his response to it in a way that it's unmistakable what that character just said to you. And, even with, Finn saying, droid, please, just those type of things. Or when BB-8 finally spills, it's the Elenium system, and Rey just immediately blows down the Elenium system there. It comes off naturally without being patronizing, which I don't know that everyone could pull off. I mean, there's a lot of talented script writers there, and so I don't want to overblow the point, but it's one of those things that you don't almost notice until you sit down and you look for it.
No, that's a really great point. And it might be one of those things where, just the handbook of writing for Star Wars, if such a thing existed, which it probably doesn't, but that is one of those little elements that does add up over time. Like this is how you do it. And I do think you're right. Like that's a very well observed point.
Thank you. Okay, so we're now leading into an incredibly amazing moment in the movie where they're having this conversation, and then all of a sudden the lights go down. They realize that someone is locked on. The controls have been overridden, and they head to the cockpit where they are observing the fact that they are being pulled into another ship. And Finn, who still has kind of got some social awkwardness, is pulling himself on top of the console and using Rey as a stepping stone. And just like the scene in Jakku where she's like, stop taking my hand. This is, get off. Just the way that Daisy Ridley is capable of expressing that annoyance there is an underrated quality that she has. And I have to admit, I have not seen her in a whole lot of other things, but I love it when she does that in Star Wars. And they believe they're being boarded by the First Order. And so their plan is that they're going to undo the repairs they do so that toxic gas leaks into the Falcon, which they don't know that's in fact what the ship they're on yet, and take out the stormtroopers, only for it to be Han and Chewbacca in that moment that we just talked about a second ago. So I feel like we got the key point of that conversation taken care of because you so well brought it up earlier, Alan. But what else stands out to you about this arrival of Han on Falcon?
I don't think I necessarily, well, maybe this is part of the rewatch and I didn't necessarily look at it this way the first few times, but the condition of the Falcon really stood out to me on this rewatch. Like just how badly it has been, damaged over the years, or how it has been looted for all intents and purposes, like panels missing, the wiring exposed, and just how in utter disrepair the ship has been. And then to hear Rey talk about, oh, Unkar Plutt's done all this, that, and the other to it, and just like we also think of the Millennium Falcon as a bit of a character in this whole enterprise. No Star Trek pun intended, but the Falcon itself has been disused and needs some love and attention and care. And the fact that Han is walking around going, who's the moof milker that did X, Y, and Z? Like, righteous indignation. And I think even as an audience member, like I feel that righteous indignation. Like, how dare Unkar Plutt or Duquesne, or any of these other, people that have been passing the Millennium Falcon around with their dirty, grubby hands. Like, how dare any of them soil or sully the Millennium Falcon? Yeah, just I think I had, for the first time, I had like the reaction of, they have really done the Falcon dirty all these years. And oh boy, am I glad to see the rightful owners of it finally back in place. That was the reaction I had in the rewatch this time, at least.
Oh, it's so true. And, to your point also, what genius was it to just make it look like it had been done dirty, because it shows. I mean, and it is a character to a large extent that we grew up with, and it does seem very disrespectful that, wow, it has been in all these other hands, and ooh, that just doesn't feel right, and how can that possibly be?
Yeah. The other thing about this is just like how commanding a presence Harrison Ford is on screen when he wanders into this, and it's just like, this movie's been fantastic up until now, but then he shows up on screen, and just Harrison Ford with his demeanor, the way he can deliver any type of, it's like, when Finn says, you can understand things, like, yeah, and then thing can understand you too, so watch it. I mean, it's just, how many other actors can deliver that line and have it come out the same way? And, the moof milker line that you talked about in all of this, when he goes to the cockpit, that expression that he has of nostalgia, just him looking at, it's like, I've been gone for this so long. The delivery of the Chewie, we're home, and that crooked grin that he has, it's so synonymous with Han Solo. And not to pick on Solo's Star Wars story, and all the best for Alden Ehrenreich, but there's just no one else that can inhabit that character that way. So
I mean, yeah, Alden did it, he did yeah, as good a job as anybody could have done, quite honestly. Yeah,
Mhm.
I don't necessarily have anything bad to say about him, but yeah, it is real tough sledding when you're filling Harrison Ford's shoes, without question. Like, yeah,
Mhm.
you're
Yeah.
right. And the other thing with this scene too is that, Star Wars has all of these references to like sort of the lived in universe kind of
Yes.
situation. And I felt like this one just really, like, in fact, this whole sequence like unloads on you with context where, like he says, Jakku, like, Chewie, I told you we should have checked the Western Reaches. So you're like, what are the Western Reaches? And
Mhm.
who are the Irving Yoys, and who's Duquesne? And, oh, they tracked us from Nantoon. Like, where's Nantoon and King Prana? And like all of these like world building elements get thrown into the mix in this sequence. And it's like you're suddenly thinking, oh my gosh, this is an even bigger galaxy than I ever remembered, because of course we've never heard of Jakku in the first place. Like, this is all brand new to us. But like, yeah, it felt like it was almost a bit of a smaller galaxy from the original and the prequels. But now suddenly, like, oh, we're in a whole different environment situation here.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's funny because I put down my notes that, the ship was taken from Han Solo by Duquesne, then it went to the Irving boys, and then to Unkar Plutt. And I don't know what it is about the Irving boys, but it just makes me think of I live down in Texas, okay? So I'm in the
Hmm.
Southwest. I'm not too far away from the South. Just like two guys that get drunk on some moonshine, wander across a ship and say, "We're going to take that out for a joyride." And, it just happens to be from the guy who stole it. And I would love to know the backstory of these guys. Who's Duquesne? Who are we met Arnkar Plutt, and he's completely unlikable. But who are these guys in this situation? You're dead on with the world building that's went on there, and I'm really surprised we don't have that story yet. At least that I'm aware. I don't think we have it anywhere.
There
Yeah.
is
And it was
something somewhere.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've read it, but way back when it wasn't. So there was a Before the Awakening book that was like three sort of
Hmm.
novellas. It was One was Poe, one was Finn, and one was Rey. But there was another one. Ah, shucks, I can't remember it off the top of my head. But there was something that it touched on a little bit of it. It wasn't everything, but
Yeah.
um,
Mhm.
yeah, there
Yeah.
was a little something somewhere. I'll find it.
Just remember, and I'll tell you what, if anybody can find it, it's you, Alan, that's for sure. But I remember sitting there, to all the world building that you just talked about, and it's for us Star Wars nerds, of course, we're drinking it in, going, "Ooh, what's that? Ooh, what's that?" It was almost overwhelming in a way sitting there in the movie theater, because of course we want to know every detail about everything and every person and every place. And so, yeah, you're right. It was afterwards you're trying to remember, what did they talk about, and trying to look it all up and see if you can find it on Wikipedia. And yeah, so
Hmm.
it was, yeah, that was another thing too, which is genius, really, to get us all that invested in that very short scene.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The other
All right.
thing that happens here is the
Hmm.
folk hero status of Han Solo. That
Yes.
when he comes on, he says, you tell him that Han Solo just stole back the Millennium Falcon for good, and Rey is just like super excited by this. It's like, this is the Millennium Falcon. You're Han Solo, and then he says, "I used to be," and then Finn's response is Han Solo, the rebel general, and then she says, "No, the smuggler." And then Finn was like, "Wasn't he a war hero?" And I love Chewbacca's just kind of like shrug.
Well, if you say so.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And then, because that's his friend, and it's they're brothers, and they're not, and they're that type of brother, which is like, I am not going to let his ego get any more swollen than it already is. And
Hmm.
then, Race is like, "This is the ship that made the Kessel Run in 14 parsecs," and he responds, 12. And that's when he walks into the cockpit, and he's just kind of soaking it all back in that they had this. But that's not where it ends. They go back into that central hold, and Han's talking about putting him in a pod, dropping off the next planet. But Ray's like, "We need your help. We have to get this droid back to the Resistance base." And Finn mentions that he's carrying a map to Luke Skywalker, which stops Han dead in his tracks. And Finn says, "You are the Han Solo that fought the rebellion. You knew him." And then he says, "Yeah, I knew him. I knew Luke." And then we get that whole conversation about, the Force and the Jedi and stuff like that. I used to just think it was all Here's the thing, it's real, all of it. Yeah, I love that scene. I absolutely just
Mhm.
him sitting back and thinking about how much his life has changed from when he was this guy that was just out to make a buck to be him joining up with the rebellion and embracing they all believe in. But okay, I don't know that I left you all a lot to talk about here, but what I mean, that is such an outstanding scene for me, and it's one of the things I appreciate most about this movie, about how it makes us remember the original trilogy and pulls on that nostalgia here. But what's your reaction to it?
It feels like Han has his own nostalgia. You mentioned him having that moment of nostalgia in the cockpit of the Falcon, but he seems to have that same sort of nostalgia in this moment. And it also opens up another one of those, okay, there's some backstory here that we need to know about, that then, of course, gets interrupted by other shenanigans, naturally. By the way, Smuggler's Run is the name of the novel by Greg Rucka, and it came out
No, that's right.
as part of the Journey to the Force Awakens thing, and there's a little bit in there about that.
Nice.
So yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that struck me about that scene also is, how does Rey know Han as a smuggler? Like,
Mhm.
where did that come from? Like, he has like that much of a galactic reputation in the backwater of Jakku. Like, she must have heard something from Unkar Plutt, maybe, I guess, about the Falcon, because she was aware of its existence, and like, and knew what the chain of custody was on this thing. So she must have had some interesting stories told to her about Han Solo that had you know, more to do with his scoundrel background than his than his war hero background, which I guess, in retrospect, like, sitting here, talking about it, I guess makes sense, because if he was no longer a war hero, and we knew that he and Leia eventually fell apart, some of this you don't really piece together until after you've seen the whole movie. But like, in this moment, it doesn't make sense. It's only kind of after the fact, and after you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, he has been smuggling for probably another 20 years. Like, he says to Leia, like, we both went back to doing what we knew best, and what he knew best was being a scoundrel and a smuggler. So
Mhm.
it makes sense that that's how Rey knows him, or knows of him. But in this moment, when you're watching the movie, like, I I sat there and was like, how the heck does Rey have any idea who he is, if all she knows of him is that he's some smuggler? But
Mhm.
Mhm.
yeah, it is as I'm sitting here talking with you about it, that, oh yeah, all of these other pieces in the movie kind of give you the idea of it.
Right. Yeah. And, as you were saying that too, I remember thinking when I was watching the movie how funny it is, as you both said, that they had different ideas of who Han was depending upon what kind of stories that they were told. And in
Hmm.
my head canon, I think, well, Ray must have heard about this, over the wash rack, in
Mhm.
between, like sneaking in the stories where the Tito's weren't like watching, and that type of thing.
Mm,
And then,
yeah,
but for
yeah.
Finn, how would he have heard of this other than, maybe just the growing up as a stormtrooper, and being conditioned that these stories leaked out, and so they would tell these stories in their bunks as they were falling asleep at night. Oh yeah, this is what happened, and this is what we're fighting, and
Hmm.
yeah, it's kind of makes you pause and wonder how that'll happen. But do you have any theories, Dennis?
Well, no, I don't. Well, other than what you said, it's just that what's the entertainment on Jakku, right? I mean, on Neva Outpost, they don't have like holo theaters or anything like that. They don't even have gambling. It's up to them to tell stories to each other.
Mhm.
Right.
But I just love the irony of all this, that when Han met Luke in Mos Eisley at the cantina, it's like Han Solo, he points right to himself, Captain Millennium Falcon. And Obi-Wan and Luke are completely unimpressed by this. And it's like, you never heard of the Millennium Falcon? Should we have had? It's the ship that made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs. Now
Yeah.
Rey and Finn are fawning all over him, and he's completely annoyed by this fact. All
Yeah.
he wanted to be was famous in A New Hope. And now at the time of The Force Awakens, it's like, oh, you people, it's just yeah, my reputation is a curse. And that's all he wanted back then in the day.
Hmm.
So,
Oh, that's a good point. Oh my gosh, I
right.
love that.
Mm.
So back on the Urvana, there's a thud, and this is when Han admits that there's Rathtars, and he's afraid one of them got loose. Rey has no idea what a Rathtar is, but Finn is aghast. You're hauling
Mhm.
Rathtars, and then and they also notice that a Guavian death gang is boarding the ship at the same time. Han is annoyed by this, but otherwise nonplussed. And Finn and Rey are just like, wait a minute, what did we get ourselves into? What is happening in this moment? And then, Rey is still trying to figure out what a Rathtar is and asking, what's a Rathtar? You ever heard of the Trilla Massacre? No, good. And then, we get the
Yep.
whole, again, talking about things that we just have no idea what they mean. Han and Chewbacca are hauling Rathtars for King Prana. Who? And then on top of that, it's like, how did you get them? Oh, we used to have a bigger crew. So what's the story behind that? So there's just like detail and story after story that we don't know anything about. And then ultimately Han says, hey, you guys hide in this crawl space underneath the deck. BB-8 will stay with me. I'm going to talk my way out of it. Chewbacca's like growling at him. He's like, yes, I do. Every single time. Harrison Ford chooses the scenery wherever he is. But then we meet Balatik. We meet the Kanjiklub. Tell it the Kanjiklub. And the fact that Han owes both of them 50,000 credits there. So big action sequence of this portion of the movie here. We're talking here, but I'm geeking out over it, and I've probably been a little bit inarticulate more than I wanted to be. Alan, what'd you think about this scene?
Well, for a start, so when we were talking about the whole spoilers thing earlier, one of the things I remember hearing about was, and I'm sorry, I'm going to forget the actors' names, unfortunately, but the Kanjiklub guys were in some martial arts movies called The Raid and The Raid 2 or something like that. And so in hearing that some of these guys were going to be part of the movie, I remember thinking, and I know I was not the only one, that there were going to be a lot of incredible, crazy fight scenes because those movies were, well regarded for having sort of advanced the genre in terms of the fight sequences that they had and also the camera work that they had involved in them. And it turned out that they were, I guess, also working as stunt coordinators on some of the stuff. But I think I had been expecting more hand-to-hand combat kind of things. And so I'd been looking for a certain level of action, and then to see the Rathtar scene, that was utterly not what those guys were deployed for. So I was like, well, this is interesting, but also, taken a little bit out of the movie where like, oh, so this is not going to be the way it works. So having that, experience of having been so, deep into the leaks and rumors and spoiler stuff and seeing how it played out on screen was like, a very strong example of, going in with certain expectations and then not having them fulfilled and thinking, okay, maybe it is better at some point that I don't go in with certain levels of expectation because you don't want to, you want to enjoy it. It's not like I'm trying to avoid disappointment. I would just rather be able to like fully immerse myself and enjoy as best I can. So that's one thing. I did think it was very smart for Han to hold BB-8 just to make sure that they didn't run off with the Falcon again. Like I was like, why is he doing that? He's making BB-8 visible. Oh, it's because it's his writing. He's so smooth. Harrison Ford Han is just so smooth. It's just wonderful. And then to have him be the one to say, I've got a bad feeling about this in the scene. I was like, that's another one of those like, it's a Star Wars touchstone. Like the fact that like somebody said that, I was like, oh, like that's almost as a fan, like we are home. We are home because somebody has decided to say that. And the scene is like breathless. Like it is like I found myself holding my breath throughout that whole Rathtar escape sequences. Like I was like, oh my gosh, these things are crazy. And the sound like in headphones of them is like frightening as heck. And one of the things that jumped out at me too is when Finn gets caught by one of them, and we've already heard like how horrific they are. It scared the heck out of Rey when it went blah on the window and everything. But she is following Finn. Like it would have been, perfectly natural for her based on everything that she's seen. And they already get a look at what one of the Kanjiklub guys getting eaten, and like, what do they look like? They look like that. And she's like, oh, and covering her mouth, and she's like horrified at what happens. And yet when Finn gets caught and starts getting dragged away, she does not let him go. Like, she follows him as best she can until she loses them, and does not give up on him. And I thought that was like a really great demonstration of her character in that moment. Like, she was not, she's already been, demonstrated to us as a, very fierce fighter and somebody who is, strong-willed and doesn't give up on things. But like, this is something so utterly beyond anything she has ever seen or dealt with or experienced, and so completely beyond. I mean, like, she just kind of ducked one of those, tentacles that came at her, but like, if that thing had grabbed her, she would have been a goner too. And yet she stuck with it and figured out a way to free him. And so like, that scene, I think, more than anything, like, impressed me about the character of Rey and her mettle, mettle, like, just how willing she was to, stick up for her friends and support them, and do her best to to take care of them, even though obviously, like, she barely knows Finn, but the bond is already there.
Right. And it's instinct. I mean, she's a survivor. So her survival instinct kicked in. And later on, we find out that maybe it was a little bit of the Force too, that was latent at the time that we just didn't really know about. But yeah, there's just so much going on in this. I want to go back real quickly to when, Han says, well, we used to have a bigger crew. We were talking about how BB-8 is such a character. If you listen very closely, his little beeps sound like, I don't like the way that sounds. That's what I picked up on this note. I don't like the way that sounds. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so perfect. That is so perfect for that.
I'm going to have to go back and listen to that. I did not catch that. That's awesome.
Yeah. There's something about this movie every time I watch it that stands out to me. And you're talking about Rey, the character, but the actress, Daisy Ridley, I think is really impressive in this. And I remember with some of the press that came out around this movie that she was talking about how heartbroken she was when she had filmed an early scene and J.J. Abrams had told her that she was like wooden as an actress. And the other thing was, is like, you can't baby talk the droids. And this is before I'd even seen the movie. And so I was like, oh, okay. But that moment when she puts her hand over her mouth as she's, reacting to the member of Kanjiklub or the Guavian Death Gang being eaten by a Rathtar, and then the "oh no, wrong fuses" expression on her face, and just and then when she saves Finn, and he's just like, I was being hauled off, and then all of a sudden we went through the door and it closed, and she's like, that's lucky. Just how matter of fact and candid she delivered that line, didn't take any credit for it, and just they went on with the rest of the scene. Daisy really shined in those moments there. She made that character believable. And I don't want to overstate it, but it's she really put some heart into that performance, which I think deserves a little bit more recognition than it's gotten over the years. Because it's unfortunate to say, but came out of that movie with a lot of people calling Rey a Mary Sue. And I don't want to spend too much time on that because I don't think it's worthy of a whole lot of discussion. It's no different than Luke being a moisture farmer and all of a sudden flying an X-Wing and destroying the Death Star. Enough said as far as I'm concerned. But I think she deserves a bit more credit than sometimes she's received from certain areas of the fandom. But being that as it may, they get to the Falcon, and there's more fantastic moments when they get aboard. It starts off with them at the door to the hangar, and Han is trying to splice through the controls, which for whatever, I guess maybe because the fuse has been pulled by Rey, he cannot get to work, and so Chewbacca is covering him. And we get that first moment where Han really discovers the power of the bowcaster, because Chewbacca gets shot in the arm, and so he picks up the bowcaster and shoots the one member of the one Guavian who goes flying backwards. And Harrison Ford's delivery of the "wow" line in that moment, and they build upon that. It's one of those understated things over the course of the movie, and we'll get into that in the future segments. But then they get on the Falcon, and it's like, you close the door, you take care of Chewbacca, and they get on the ship, and then Rey is just jumping in there. You're gonna need a co-pilot. Well, I got one back there. And then he's like, you're going to have to override the compressor. You're going to have to, prime thing, this, that, because of all these bizarre things that Unkar has done to the ship. And Han's just like, what happened to the Falcon I knew this entire time? He's just expecting to jump back into the pilot's seat and pick up where he left off, and doesn't want anyone to be a, co-pilot backseat driver that's not named Chewbacca. Anyway, I've gushed about that. What do you two take away from this closing scene of this segment?
There you go. I've been jumping in and running my mouth. Oh,
well, you're our guest. I mean,
well,
that's what you're doing here. But well, if you're thinking about it, I can jump in. But yeah, there's a couple things in this. That one thing I thought of from the very beginning when Han used that bowcaster was, you're telling me this is the first time he's ever tried that?
Right.
Like, come on. He's been with Chewie for how many decades? And this is the first time he's ever used a bowcaster. So, I mean, yes, it's a fun moment, and it was definitely built upon. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, really? Is that for real? But that's 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 a good part. I love that. Oh, and another thing. Oh, I just thought of something else. With Rey knowing everything about the Millennium Falcon, looking back on that now, I mean, there's been some supplemental material that has talked about how she pretended to be a pilot and that she would practice on different pieces of junk and whatnot. So, was she sneaking into the Falcon at night? And even though she knew it was like a piece of junk, quote unquote, and because how would she know that she needed to that there was this fuel pump and that there was this compressor that they needed to bypass and that there was all of these different types of things, unless she was, sneaking out at some point and doing that.
Yeah, along those lines, we know she was left there at Nima Outpost as a little girl. I mean, we have the flashback sequence where, Unkar's holding onto her arm, and you kind of get the impression that he barely tolerated there. But can you not picture like a young Rey, like following Unkar around and pestering him with questions about what's that? Why'd you install that? What are you doing that? Blah, 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 this, that, and the other, until finally he had enough and she was old enough that he yelled at her that, she took off and found herself a home inside that old decrepit AT-AT there on Jakku there. But yeah, no, I do. Of all of the short stories that are in that Before Awakening book that's aimed at a younger audience that came out, I enjoyed Rey's the most, I think, of the three, because it seemed like the most plausible of the three of them, because Finn is not really the guy that got described in that book. He is someone who was at the top of his class and excelling and was, but then had second thoughts later, when everything that comes afterwards is always portrayed him as being super reluctant about this whole thing. Poe has had a couple different explanations about how it is that he became entangled with the Resistance, and so that's fine. But the whole idea that Rey was such a trusting person at one point that she could do all this work and get taken advantage of by people that professed to have some camaraderie with her, and just kind of detailing the backstory there was the best one. But anyway, my thoughts.
Yeah, that was a particularly heartbreaking one. I agree. I'm sorry, Jay. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. No, you're fine. I just had like an epiphany that what if Unkar actually had Rey do all the work? And that's how she knew. He was like, oh, go put this fuel pump in here. And she's like, okay.
Well, she does say, it's like, I thought it was a bad idea too,
Yeah, exactly. So maybe he was the one that had her do it, and that's how she knew where everything was.
Yeah, maybe like just I'm sick of you tailing me around. Make yourself useful. Do this.
Right. Yeah.
A couple other things I want to call out real quick from this scene before we wrap it up. But the they're getting ready to go to Lightspeed from the hangar of the Eravana, and Rey's that question is from inside the hangar, is that even possible? And Han Solo's just that expression on his face is like, what he wants to say is like, God, I hope so. But what he says is, I never asked that question until after I've done it. And of course it works, scoundrel luck there. And then the classic callback from, original Star Wars, which is, come on, baby, don't let me down. And how many decades has he been waiting to say that again since he's been without the Falcon? You got to wonder. But yeah, the scene ends, the segment ends with Balatik on the comm, saying, inform the First Order that Han Solo is the droid they want, and it's aboard the Millennium Falcon. But, Any last bits from this segment that we haven't covered that stand out to either of you before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I'll say that the moment that Han takes the bowcaster and he shoots the control panel to get the door to open, there's a weird it's not like a smooth cut somehow. It's almost like it just kind of jolts a little bit between before and the after of the shot. And it reminds me of them doing something like that in the original Star Wars, that there's some scene where they like blasted it. I think it might have been when Luke blasted the controls for the door before the bridge swing sequence. And like, yeah, it's just, there's a little bit of a jump cut on it, where it's not quite seamless. And it reminded me like, oh wow, like that's not the first time. Like maybe that's part of the visual language of Star Wars that they did that. And I do like the moment of like Finn just like rooting through everything and coming up with the seeker droid that Luke practiced on all those years ago. Like that's kind of a fun little nod to things. But I think the thing that really jumped out at me more than anything is that, you know, and this may be reading subtext into it that wasn't there, but like the fact that Han had to like, you know, sort of accept, and he did, you know, grudgingly, but you'd kind of expect it grudgingly just from his character in general, that it was a young woman in the co-pilot chair instead of his old, you know, Wookiee friend. That almost felt like not just a baton passing, but also sort of a good point for representation. I mean, you know, we have, you know, a black stormtrooper and a female, you know, hero who eventually becomes somebody that is force sensitive. You know, like I am, you know, learning, I think over the years, like as I get older, just how much representation matters among, you know, segments of the population that are not me as a, you know, white male heterosexual, you know, like every, you know, possible, you know, societal top of the food chain kind of thing, right? And seeing how people have reacted to, you know, the characters in The Force Awakens and the broader representation, it really has been an amazing thing to watch. And I had that moment as I was rewatching for, you know, our podcast here, just seeing Han adapt to Rey in the pilot's chair and realizing that she knows what she's talking about. She belongs there. And that kind of belonging, like it felt special to me. And I imagine like there is a generation of fans who, you know, are getting something out of this that they didn't necessarily get out of the prequels or the originals. And it's just a product of the time. But I think the sequels gave it to them at some level. And I'm really happy that that is the case.
Well said. Well said. Jay, any last thoughts?
I just love this segment. Nail, and I'm so glad that you joined us for this because, I mean, you could describe paint drying on the inside of a Star Destroyer in such a way that would engage our audience so well.
Thank you so much.
Seriously, you always have the most amazing takes and you're so fun to banter with and to roll ideas off of. So it's just been a heck of a lot of fun. What a ride.
All right. Fantastic. Well, that brings us to the end of this segment covering The Force Awakens. And I'm sure if time was not a currency, so to speak, that we could have probably spoke about this for another 30 or 40 minutes easily. And I'm going to have to find more time for us to talk about that era leading up to The Force Awakens at some point in the future, because that was some of the most fun 30 minutes I've had talking about Star Wars for a while.
Right?
That was such a great, like I said, it was one of my favorite eras of being a fan. And I really am glad that I got to have one of my heroes from that era here on the show for that. So thank you for joining us. Before we go, please let everybody know what you're up to. You've done something really exciting lately that we're going to be covering in a future episode, but I'd love for you to go ahead and tease that now and where everyone can find you.
Well, thank you very much. And so, yeah, Star Wars 7x7 has been on hiatus for a while now, unfortunately, and it is going to be returning in some form in the near future. May not be the daily podcast situation, but it'll be something interesting, I believe. And I think a lot of it is going to be motivated by the work that I did with this thing that I'm waving on video for people who are, you know, listening to this on audio, which is Hyperspacing Hope. This was the book that when I went on hiatus, I set out to write, and it became a lot bigger and more, you know, complicated project than I ever thought it was going to be. But it finally came out just at the very end of the year last year. And so diving into Hope and the nature of Star Wars even more in depth is what I'm going to be looking forward to doing. So Hyperspacing Hope is the book. Star Wars 7x7 was the podcast that spawned it. That's at sw7x7.com. And that's every social media channel is pretty much at sw7x7 except for TikTok and Twitter, which is SW7X7 podcast for both of those. And Hyperspacing Hope is on Amazon and hopefully in-person retailers in the not too distant future.
Fantastic. So as a spoiler, and I'll be covering what's coming up on the show here in a bit, but we're going to be talking about that book a week from the day that this comes out. Yeah, Jay's holding up her copy. So thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and this amazing discussion of The Force Awakens. We hope you've enjoyed it. And if so, we'd love it if you consider subscribing to the podcast on your podcatcher of choice. We'd also greatly appreciate your ratings and reviews wherever you do listen. Please head over to retrozapp.com and you can find the entire back catalog of the show as well as the other shows that are on the network. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody where else we can be found online?
Sure thing, Dennis. We're so easily found. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. We make it easy for you that way. And we also have our plethora of Pinterest boards that you can check out with all kinds of fun ideas for everything Star Wars. And then we also have our 2 YouTube outlets. So no video, just audio on those, but you can hit us up over there for likes, subscribes, and please share those out with your friends as well. And then if you'd like to email us about this episode or any others, or just drop us some thoughts, you can do so at our Gmail, which is podcaststardust@gmail.com. And then if you want to pick up some Podcast Artist swag, we do have a TeePublic store. So we have 7 different show logo designs available on all kinds of fun things. So hit us up at the link in our show notes for that. And just want to thank you in advance because every one of those purchases does help to support the show.
Jay, what is going on in the world of cosplay?
Well, as always, you can catch me over on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay, and May the 4th is coming up. So I've got a couple of fun things planned for that. I'll be around and about as Ahsoka, and you can also catch me as Hera and the Fourth Sister, my original concept Mandalorian based on Tahiri Vela, and some other fun things as well.
Okay, upcoming on the show on Friday, we'll be getting into episodes 5 and 6 of Maul. Real quick, Alan, what do you think of Maul Shadow Lord?
Oh my gosh, I'm enjoying the heck out of it, and the art, like the animation, the painterly backgrounds, the imperfection of it, the intentional imperfection, the impressionistic kind of aspect of things. I'm absolutely loving and adoring like this particular evolution in the animation, like, and the story so far is very compelling. How are you guys liking it?
Oh, loving it. Absolutely.
We love it.
Recorded our discussion of episodes 3 and 4 earlier today. So this is why we need Star Wars 7x7 back, so I can get more of your opinions on this, but no pressure. All right. So after that, the plan right now for Monday is to do news, but our recording schedule is going to be much earlier in the week. So I don't know if there will be any. If there's not, we'll be re-airing an old episode. And then on Wednesday, Mr. Voivod is going to be back with us again to discuss that very book he was promoting just a moment ago. So make sure you come back for that. Okay, thanks for listening to episode 1024 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.